So we are currently live now with Lyndsey Smith. Of course, I want to talk to you about the latest book that you just published regarding self-publishing. I think that is such a overdue book to have available to writers
Right.
and possibly for publishers as well. But I would be remiss if I didn't first congratulate you. So I understand that you also just became a mentor on the HWA, the Horror Writers Association.
I did.
Very cool. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Did you now was that a surprise for you, Lyndsey, or is that something that you applied for?
No, I applied for it.
Cool.
It was something that I had always shied away from. Just because I didn't know if I'd be able to put my all into it. I didn't know if I'd really be able to help. I didn't know what all it entailed. And when they sent out the call recently that they were really, really short on mentors, I thought, you know what? Like, if I'm ever going to do it, now's the time to shoot my shot and see if I can truly make a difference for someone. And that was my motivation, and that's why I did it. And I got paired with a really, really great person who's
Good.
me stuff. And yeah, I'm super excited.
That is really awesome. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you were paired up or not, because I know when you announced it on your socials there, you weren't quite there yet.
Yeah, they paired me up that day.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, and it sounds like really then, so your how to self-edit your novel book was, or maybe they kind of go hand in hand, where you definitely have a mentorship quality, and it seems like this book is an opportunity to really reach out and kind of mentor folks on the importance of being able to at least get your book to a reasonable level of quality before either putting it out there to the world, self-publishing or otherwise.
Right.
When did that idea first come about for you to write this book? I mean, it's a big book, so I don't think it was an overnight idea and implementation.
So when I first got started as an editor, my main goal was to do the best I possibly could for others and to make sure that the books that they put out were the best quality they could possibly be. But there are some authors who are just starting out in the industry who don't have the financial capability to hire an editor. And that's not anything on them, and that's not anything on me as an editor who charges professional rates.
Right.
It's just entirely how the industry works. And I could sit there all day and say, you need professional editing, but if they couldn't afford it, there's nothing I could do to change that. And there wasn't necessarily anything they could do either. So their only option was to either just send out something that wasn't edited with no guidance, or they could opt for one of the editors who's like, hey, I will edit your 100,000 word novel for $50. And when you get an editor like that, you would have been better off not just doing it yourself.
Right.
Just that's not a feasible option for someone who is a career focused author who wants to make money from their writing. And so I wanted to help the people who didn't have any options. I wanted to help them get to the point where they could afford me, or another professional editor.
Sure.
I wanted them to have options. I wanted them to have support. I wanted them to have guided assistance from someone who is an industry professional, who just could see it from their perspective and not try to hammer it in that their only option was to, make themselves financially destitute in order to try and hire an editor, because
Right.
it's not.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that as well. That it's you're not there to push the editor aside. You're there to make them more presentable to a would-be editor, and to get as close to that process as possible, to understand it's still important to be able to have properly edited book.
Yes.
As much as you can afford it. And I mean, this book's 350 pages. It's I'm in Canada, so the Canadian cost of that is $25 compared to what you would pay professional rates.
Mhm.
I could definitely see people going to this and thinking that's a steal. What a great shortcut to editing and publishing. But where do you differentiate? Because I know you mentioned that this doesn't take the place of an editor. So when you're talking about kind of narrowing down all of your information, but giving folks as much of that information as possible, was that must have been, I can only imagine that must have been super challenging for you to take everything that's up there in your big juicy brain and kind of go, here you go.
Mhm.
I present you.
It was anyone who followed my social media, there was a delay. I had a big Amazon delay with it. And I kept saying, "Oh my gosh, I just thought of something else I could add." So while I was waiting for them to fix my account, I was adding, and I was it's constant now. Even now, every single day, I'm like, "Oh, that would have been great to put in the book." But I'm literally going to do that for years. There's if I wrote like a Stephen King size editing book, I'd be able to touch the surface. Like I put it into perspective. Actually, in the book, I was explaining what a style guide is, and an industry recognized style guide for traditional publishing, self-publishing, small publishing houses is the Chicago Manual of Style. And that's what I learned from. That's how I learned my craft. It's literally the foundation of everything that I do. And that book alone is over 1,100 pages.
Wow.
So, and that doesn't even begin to cover developmental editing and like line editing. Those things are more instinctual than they are. You can be taught the basics of storytelling and structure, but a lot of it is instinctual. A lot of it is just from experience, and that's stuff that you just cannot put in books. But I tried.
Well, thank you for trying that. That's yeah, that's a monumental task. And I love it too, Lindsay. You keep handing me my segues on a silver platter because
Oh, you're
you
welcome.
mentioned line editing and such. And I know when I had my first story edited, the first question I was asked was, "What type of editing do you want?" And I thought, um, I just want it edited so I can sell it. Not realizing there's a lot of different angles of that, line editing, structural editing, all kinds of stuff. What should folks be looking for when they're not only just looking to hire an editor, but when they're doing their own story and taking their own approach on the editing process? What are the different types of editing?
Um, so there's I offer kind of three different types of packages, and this is going to really answer that question, but I group them sometimes. So your structural editing, your content editing, your developmental editing, those are kind of all the same thing. They're just a bird's eye view of your novel, your narrative arc, your plot, your theme, your character development, the meat of the story. In my book and in a couple of my blog posts on my website, I refer to it as a house. And this is your framework, your foundation, your roof, the things that make your house structurally sound. And that's what developmental editing is. Your line and copy editing, that's more your fixtures, the paint on the walls, the carpet. Those are the things that enhance your reader experience and keep them into your story. The line editing is just going through and making sure there's sentence variants, that your sentences flow, that you have appropriate transitions between scenes, paragraphs, chapters. Obviously your copy editing is your grammar. Lay versus lie, that's always
Yeah.
fun. Effect, those, and then your punctuation, and then the proofreading is the final thing. That's the final step. Kind of like your last hurrah. That's the inspector coming into the house to make sure that your water's not leaking everywhere. That's what that is. And I see a
Cool.
lot of authors coming in say, I need it proofreaded or proofread. Oh my gosh, can you believe I said that? I need it. I need my novel proofread. I need it. And it's like, no, you don't. You need it copy edited. You need it line and copy edited, which is something that I offer as one package because it's easier for me and it's more cost efficient for the authors that I work with. But you should never go to an editor and say that you need your work proofread unless it's already been through the editing stages.
Very cool. And again, thank you also for the segue, because I when I knew that I was going to be chatting with you today, I saw somebody else posted something that just, it kind of broke my heart a little bit. Where they posted in a forum about writers, of course, and they said, "Hey, I want to be a writer. I've got this book, or I want to write a book. How do I do that? How do I write a book, basically, and or get a book published?" And of course, a lot of the advice was not all the same. Some of it was actually good advice, but some of it was, most of it, I should say, was, okay, well, the best way to do that is, instead of actually going through the original or the traditional channels of publisher, etc., do it yourself. There's, they mentioned a couple of self-publishing sites, KDP, and different platforms that allow them to publish their book however it is with the push of a button. I thought, yeah, that's not really what's going to help this person out, I don't think. So for those people that are watching this, that that maybe have a book that they haven't read, or maybe they've got some notes on it and it's their big dream to get this book published, they don't know where to go. For those that haven't read your book yet, and I'm going to put a link down below, by the way, Lyndsey, so that people don't have that as an excuse. But for those that are maybe waiting for your book to order and they want to start anyways, knowing these various attacks of editing, what would you usually suggest that somebody starts with, maybe the first couple of steps and a completed manuscript, to at least get it to the point where it's not going to be so overwhelming when they start to drill down into these specific editing processes?
Okay. I know a lot of authors have an entirely different process from what I'm about to explain, and that I would never knock an author's process. That I'm a weirdo. I wear earbuds to anything when I'm editing. Like they're not playing music. I've never attached them to anything. They're just in my ears as like a security blanket kind of thing.
Sure.
It's weird. We all have our idiosyncrasies that we stick to, and it's like the football player that doesn't change his underwear or his socks. Like, I mean, we all have them. So I always stress that, especially for a brand new author, your main concern should always be developmental. If you're doing self-editing, if you're looking to hire an editor, no matter where you are financially in your process, the developmental aspect of your book, when you're first starting out and when you're first learning your craft, that is super important. That should always be your focus. You should write your story. Don't spend a lot of time while you're writing it going back and revising it, going back and correcting. Just get that all on the page, because you cannot revise a story effectively unless you have the entire thing. Right. As a developmental editor, I cannot look at a chapter and give a client a sample of that chapter, because that one chapter is not representative of your novel as a whole. You need the entire thing. You need the bird's eye view. You can't just hone in on one particular part. That's not effective. Right. So get it all on paper. Take a breather from it. Take about a week away from it. Read books. Work on another novel, and then go back to it. And that's when you're going to really focus on whether or not your story flows, if your characters are full-blooded or if they're two-dimensional. I always stress the importance of using a book map during that process, so you can make sure that the main plot of your novel is consistent throughout. And, because readers are they're going to skip over if you misplaced a comma. A lot of them are gracious enough to skip over a kind of awkward sentence here and there. But they're not going to be able to skip over it if your story just doesn't make sense. Right. If you have huge plot holes. And always, always, always maybe not later on in your, when you're confident with your writing and you have a large reader base and you're working with an editor, maybe not then, but now when you're just starting out, always use beta readers. They're some of the nicest people you'll ever meet. A lot of them do it for free. Some editors, like myself, we offer professional beta reading because our feedback is a little bit more tailored, and kind of like a developmental edit, but very, very a lot smaller than the
Yeah.
developmental. But a beta reader is always going to give you some kind of indication if there's something wrong with your story that you need to take care of, before you send it out into the world. So that's another step I would always keep. But yeah, I think that's about it.
Oh, that's great. And I love the fact that you put it a lot more eloquently, but essentially laid out that don't use editors as a motivational tool to actually write your story. Make sure it's all down there first,
Yes.
rather than writing a few chapters and say, is this good enough? Should I finish it? And it's like, well, yeah, you should finish it so that you
All
have a
right.
story. And I love too the fact, Lyndsey, you mentioned the importance of beta readers,
Yes.
to help you to get that structure down properly. Because I remember chatting with one of the um, one of the boot camp instructors from back in the day, and I know he was saying that it was surprising to him how many folks showed up thinking they had a story, but they didn't. They had a lot of the framework, but it wasn't structured properly. It wasn't a very smoothly flowing story. When it comes to beta readers, though, how do you find a good beta reader? I mean, what makes a good beta reader? I'm assuming it's not probably your next door neighbor who cuts your lawn, or a friend or a family member, your mom, who's going to say that she loves every word that that you're the next Hemingway.
Yeah. No, avoid family. Unless you have someone in your family that is like me and is very blunt and is very that when they tell you something, you're like, man, you could have been a little bit nicer there. Then
True
maybe
fish.
they would be a great beta reader.
Yeah.
But there are actually Facebook groups for professional beta readers, people who have actually been trained. I know the Editorial Freelancers Association has a couple of different training modules for
Okay.
beta reading. Um, and to kind of help someone who's interested in getting into it and how they can give the best feedback to the authors that they work with. Or what you can do, especially if you're a horror author, you can go into groups like Books of Horror, and you can find the people who are talking about beta reading. There's a lot of them who are like, I got an advanced copy, I beta read this. It's great. Or the people who are the ones who are constantly giving very detailed feedback and detailed reviews of the books that they read. Those are fantastic people to approach because they're, especially the ones who are talking about the character development or they're talking about the narrative structure as a whole. Like, I love the ending. I kind of got lost at this point, but then it really swooped in and caught me again. Like, those people who are able to recognize kind of the ebbs and flows of plots and pacing, and they're going to be able to pick up on areas where your novel struggles, so that way you can go back in and you can reinforce those areas, or you can enhance the parts that make your novel great. And those are fantastic people to use as beta readers.
Fantastic, right? And regarding that too, I mean, once you get to the point of beta reading, I know for me, it's I want to get this book as close to what I feel is as good as it's going to get without that outside, hopefully non-biased constructive criticism.
Right.
But to get to that point, even like, what do you find, Lyndsey, or maybe some of the more common, I don't want to call them errors, but I guess in a way they are, but common lack of knowledge, I guess, when it comes to the writers, assuming that the imagination's there, they've got somewhat of a talent, and they can tell a story, but as far as writing a story, what do you find are the commonalities that you see that folks are more apt to need improving on before it's publishable and ready for kind of mass consumption?
Okay. There's really two. that I
Okay.
would really, really always hone in on. Your I've seen a lot of authors who approach the twists and turns in a novel like they do a jump scare movie. Something just pops out of nowhere and you're like, whoa, okay. And in the movie, it's effective.
Yeah.
In your novel, when the readers had a much slower buildup, it's not. There has to be a clear-cut map from how we got to point A to point B. You can't just have an entire novel where it's a ghost house, and then at the very, very end of it, it's vampires and a castle. It's the reader is going to be what
Yeah.
where did the vampire, like, what? And so it has to be done a little bit. I want to say just gracefully. It needs to be tiny little inserts of information throughout your novel that lead up to that. There needs to be a certain parallelism. There
Okay.
needs, from the beginning to the end, there needs to be something that the reader is going to be able to say, okay, I understand that. Because if you insert elements into your story that the reader can't understand, it may make sense to you. It may seem like a great jump scare. It may seem like a great plot twist, but if it doesn't make sense, it's not going to be effective. So everything needs to kind of have an explanation. It needs to have a buildup. If you do have some kind of revelation, if your characters have some kind of epiphany, if there is a new monster introduced, it has to be explained. It has to have some kind of foundation underneath it for it to exist. Like it has to be a relatable experience. It has to be something that they can explain away for themselves, even if you don't 100% explain it yourself, which authors aren't required to. Your readers
Right.
can use their imagination about some things, but if they're using their imagination about the majority of things that you write about versus just a couple, that's going to be a problem. They need to feel stable in your narrative arc, and I think that's again, I fall back on the book map. That's
Yeah.
going to keep that. Because if you have a chapter that has a great jump scare, but it has nothing to do with your narrative arc that you've established, and it has nothing to do with your subplot, cut it. It's going to confuse your readers.
Cool.
Another thing that I see a lot of authors struggle with is tense, a tense change within their
Mhm.
novel. Tense changes and perspective changes kind of go hand in hand. Um, I just usually see authors, they're usually coupled together.
Right.
Either I'll see an entire 3/4 of a novel is written in past tense, and then we all of a sudden have another chapter that's written in present tense and by an author, a character that we haven't been introduced yet, or we haven't gotten that character's perspective. But it you have to look at what reader expectation you've already established, and if you've established for that reader that this entire novel is going to be written in past tense and it's in Bob's perspective, but then you switch it over and it's in present tense and it's in Sam's perspective, in the last couple of chapters, that's not conducive for the reader experience, and that's going to bring them out of it and they're going to get confused. So always maintain consistency. If you're going to do that, it needs to be something that starts at the very beginning of the novel, where you're alternating every 1 or 2 or 3 chapters, something like that. You need to make sure that they know from the very, very start of that book what your book's about, not necessarily what it's about, like you don't want to spill your secrets, but set the
Sure.
tone. Set the tone effectively, set the pacing effectively, and set the perspective and the tense, and you should be okay.
That sounds like some absolutely golden advice, and I hope people are writing this stuff down.
It's in
No,
my
that's
book.
read the book. It's already been written for you.
Right.
No, that's great because yeah, I mean, point of view is so hard to master, and I find that every now and again I'll pick up a book and it'll have some alternating points of views, but it's generally throughout the novel,
Mm-hmm.
and it's done so seamlessly that it makes it look easy, but it's far from easy.
Very.
And I love what you mentioned as well about having when you're trying to introduce like jump scares and things like that, it really needs to be kind of a natural progression, and you have to have earned that jump scare. It sounds like, and it sounds
Mhm.
like that. Just writing, the word suddenly in large caps, it doesn't quite cut it.
No,
Suddenly,
that
the ghost for vampires. Oh, well, it
yeah,
doesn't make sense.
I hate that word. I
I
hate
know, right?
books. No,
Just don't do it.
don't do it. To me, that's the epitome of showing or telling versus showing. Like
Right.
suddenly, like no, explain that word. Like spell out that word. Make it an entire paragraph of how suddenly this happened. Like don't rely on that word. It's a crutch.
Yep.
Mhm.
And your book, it sounds like, is going to be a great way to kind of kick people's crutches away and give them something that they can really put to practice.
That's right.
How so when folks get to that point, so when they've read your book, they've honed their stories as much as possible, that it's now sellable, and maybe they got some income on the table they can play around with a little bit. And maybe now down the road, they're ready to take that next step and say, okay, I want to make this, 10%, 20% more effective or what have you. Maybe they're getting an agent and their agent, whatever the case is, and they
Mhm.
want to hire an editor. How do they try, or how do they know that they're going to select a good editor? How are they, they be confident that they're not going to get ripped off? Because like you said, they don't want to have somebody that's going to give, $50 for a, 30,000 word book. At the same time, they don't want the other end of it where they're charging them, $300 for a 100 page or, whatever book.
Right. Okay. Um, so I would say always get recommendations, but that's kind of a double-edged sword. You
Sure.
want an editor that is recommended by authors in the industry that you are in the genre that you are in. But you don't want to rely only on that. And I say that for the simple fact that not every author understands the quality of a good edit versus a not so good edit. Um, I've seen some authors hire an editor that's not qualified and praise that person. But when I, as a professional editor, go in and look at the book, because I get nosy,
Yeah.
when I go in and I look in the look inside and I see 12 errors in the first page, and some of them are errors that a reader's going to see, that author may not 100% understand that they didn't get what they think they got.
Yeah.
And so I say, as the recommendations are great, but the editor has to have something to back that up. Is that editor credentialed? Like I have a lot more credentials than a lot of editors out there. I have my cat. I'm sorry, I don't know.
Oh,
She's
that's okay. I'm surprised I
behind
don't
me.
have mine cat's butt in my face right now.
Yeah, she's usually like in my face, and she's quite large, so it's
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so
I've
I'm
got three.
sorry.
That's okay. Squirrel.
Um, right, I'm very much that way. That's what my earbuds help with.
Yeah.
So when you're getting the recommendations, those are great, but they have to have something to back that up. And I, like myself, I have 2 bachelor's degrees. I have been trained as a copy editor. I've taken the testing. I've gotten my certifications. I've taken over 100 hours of continuing education for developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, proofreading. I'm constantly updating my craft. I'm constantly learning new skills. I offer sample edits, which some editors do and some editors do not. If an
Okay.
editor has been in the industry for 20 years, they don't offer sample edits because they don't need to.
Right.
Um, and some editors charge for sample edits. I don't. yet, but I may
Yeah.
later. And that is not, I've seen so much disinformation in author groups saying that if the editor doesn't offer sample edits, or if the sample edits aren't free, then they're scammers. You need to avoid them. No,
Yeah.
no. Like, that is time that an editor is taking away from their actual workload. So if that editor wants to charge you for that edit, you just got however many words you give them edited.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
So, it's something that we need to hone the expectation on. We need to fix that.
Right.
So it's get a sample edit, get recommendations, look at the author's credentials, and just because that editor is professional, they have credentials, they have, all the training, they have all the recommendations, that still doesn't mean that that's the right editor for you. Editing is entirely subjective. What I edit versus what someone else in the same industry, the same genre, the same specialization, the same credentials, our perspectives are going to be totally different. Our
Right.
instincts are going to be totally different. Everything about our life experiences, our training, the books we've read, all of that changes an author's or an editor's perspective. So how I edit a story, even though I have the same grammar and style guidelines as the next editor, maybe totally different. Maybe I take a lighter hand. Maybe they're a grammar purist. Maybe I'm okay with an author, putting sentence fragments here and there, especially when it enhances the pacing. Maybe the other editor isn't. So you always want to make sure that that editor's style enhances your voice as an author, but also kind of meets with just that basic part of you. Do they help you present something that you would read? Like, we don't all read very stringent text. So
Right.
we also don't want to read something that's allowed so many errors to go through that it's hard to read. So, you want to find that happy medium in what
Yeah.
enhances and elevates your work, because that's ultimately going to do you the most service.
Okay. Fantastic. And I guess to kind of, and I think that this is amazing. I think that folks that are listening to this conversation as well, I think, especially with all your explanations, and how much value you're putting into just this conversation alone, I think is really going to give people, a better sense of where to start as far as honing their craft, honing their stories, making it more publishable. But what should they expect after reading your book, based on where they are now, perhaps in their craft, and how would they take it to the next level by hiring you? Where could they find you?
Okay. So one of the things that I haven't mentioned so far is that editing book, yeah, it's thick, but there's also what I've called an additional editing package that the people who have bought the paperback version, they get it for free.
Oh,
It's
cool.
on my website. It's 40 pages, over 40 pages, because I kept adding to it again. Um, but the ebook users would have to get it. It's only $5.
Cool.
And it's exercises, it's the worksheets that you need for the developmental editing exercises, all of that stuff, helping you write your blurb, helping you write your title, helping you find and hone in on your main focus. So if you go through the book and you use that and you really digest the concepts, I have also indicated in the book that I'm always here for questions. I know at some point I'm going to get absolutely inundated. I can't say that word. Swamped. There we go. I'm
Well,
gonna get absolutely swamped with questions, and right now I'm at a point where I'm okay with that, because my focus is helping authors not have to succumb to a lot of the scams that they normally would. So if they get the book and they need to reach out to me, please feel free. I will help you explain something, even if it's brief. If there's a a few times in there where I said, hey, rewrite this and make some corrections and then send it to me and I'll check it for you. Just because I want them to, I don't want them to just kind of be thrown into the ocean. Hey, sink or swim. Like, I want to help. Yeah. So there's no charge to that. Just reach out to me. I don't bite, I don't think. So my clients may disagree with my red pen, but it is what it is. And then, once you get to that point where you are comfortable hiring an editor and you feel like I might be a good choice for you, they can always find me on Facebook. I have my Horace Smith editing page. I do have a lot of people who contact me on my personal page as well, just Lyndsey Smith. You see me everywhere. I comment everywhere. So, feel free to do that. Or they can go to my website, which is www.horacesmithediting.com. And that's where I'm going to start actually putting a lot of editing videos. There are going to be more books in this series. I'm actually already planning one that's going to be released in July.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so that's going to be a planner that's focused on editing, on the entire spectrum of a career-focused author, their branding, their marketing, publishing checklist, all of that stuff. All of the stuff.
That is fantastic.
Stuff. And so it's going to be girthy too, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And so that's coming out. And, I have a proposal sheet in there, an inquiry section, and that will attach whoever wants to be into my client portal where we can start that conversation and where they can have a customized proposal on, just whatever will enhance their story, be it developmental editing, if they need a manuscript evaluation, anything like that. And that helps that direct communication.
Wow, that is incredible. What a wealth of information, Lyndsey. And clearly, HWA picked a great mentor to have as part of their program as well, because you clearly live, breathe this stuff, and it's what you're all about. And I'm going to put all links down here as well so that people can jump aboard and I can help populate your swamp with all the questions that are probably going to come in, no doubt. So sorry about that. But at the same time, we'll, of course, post in there to your website so the folks can go in there, enjoy your videos, see what you're all about, and, hopefully take it to the next level as well. And, pay you some of their early royalties to make it even better.
That sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And I hope we can chat again, because I'm pretty certain that we could probably chat all day long about all this kind of stuff. There's so much to it. Like you say, there's a lot of the things.
Yeah. Everyone always asks me, when do you sleep? And it's like, I kind of don't. This is kind of my life. So
I know, right? Just kind of hang upside down for a couple hours a day and back at it again.
I totally rock as a vampire, I'm telling you.
Exactly. Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much again, Lyndsey. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet.